Hey, this is Anney.
And Samantha.
And welcome to Stuff I Never Told You, a production of iHeartRadio. And welcome to another sub segment of Fictional Women Around the World. We are moving into Star Wars territory. And I just want to start this one by saying I had a plan. I already knew the 3, because I usually do 2 in May, because of Star Wars stuff in May.
Yes.
I already had a plan for who I was going to talk about. And Samantha, as you might have noticed, at the top of this outline, this one says May.
Yes, it does.
Well, that's because I originally intended to talk about it in May.
Oh, okay.
But we're talking about it now, and it's a 2-parter.
Oh, my. Y'all,
that's
it is
a part...
probably longer than some of our actual episode outlines.
It is really long. And I cannot stress enough, I know you won't believe me. This was me reining myself in. I didn't even talk about like the Thrawn objective. What?
Yeah, I definitely got an email saying, so it's going to be a 2-parter. FYI. And I was like, what? Okay. I love it.
And
Let's
then
go.
I was like, it's 9 pages long also. So I moved it to April because I am very excited to talk about this character, because I also feel like this is one of the few times where I'm going to get the jump on Disney. But also I wanted to talk about Bo-Katan Kryze, and The Mandalorian season 3 is ongoing, and she is very important to that season. So I think I'm still going to talk about her, but I wanted to wait until season 3 is done. I might not. I might change it up. But that is why we are talking about Mara Jade. And oh, I cannot stress enough how excited I am to talk about her. Oh my gosh. Yes. This, I know I've mentioned it, but one of my very favorite moments that happened in the, quote, Legends or EU universe, which is what happened, what was canon before Disney took over, is Mara Jade and her whole mess with Luke, which I will talk about, and Luuke the clone. That is Luke with 2 U's. That is what his name was. I loved it. We are going to talk about that. There have been rumors of casting of this character. So far, she has not explicitly been in anything recent since Disney took over. After the recently released Ahsoka trailer, people got to speculating there was like some hints based on, like, it was literally writing in Arabish, which is like the language in Star Wars, that people were like, Emperor's Hand, it's Mara Jade. I don't think so, but we'll talk about that.
Do you know
more.
the language?
No.
Oh.
I know. What kind of fan am I?
I know. I cannot believe you. I don't believe you.
No, it's a tragedy. But they do that a lot in the Mandalorian. Like in first season, you can see some Arabish that reads like, Luuke Skywalker blew up the Death Star. But I only know that because of other fans who do know Arabish.
Oh, okay.
I don't. I am going to assume very confidently, and who knows, maybe one day you will bring this episode back to me and laugh in my face, Samantha, that everything I'm about to talk about is not going to be canon. I do not think any of this is going to be canon, other than like maybe her backstory. But who knows? They are trying some interesting things. I would be shocked. I would personally be shocked. I have read some things that she is already canon in Disney, but they weren't the most reliable. I couldn't find a single instance. Apparently there was some mention of her in Andor as well, and I was like, I don't think so. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm already getting off the rails.
Arguing with yourself about
this
things.
Is how it goes.
Yes. Keep going.
Yes, and I do apologize to you, Samantha, because this is just going to be me rambling. Oh,
I'm excited. These are my favorites.
Yeah, and we're recording them back to back, so
right.
Yeah. All right, standard disclaimer about the EU Legends universe versus Disney. It's confusing. It's especially confusing now because they're bringing in characters like Thrawn, who was a huge pivotal character in the Legends universe, which is like what happened before Disney, as I said, but it was huge in like the 90s, like books and games and comics and all that kind of stuff. So if you're like me and you read that stuff, you grew up reading that stuff, and you know what Thrawn did in that, and now they're bringing Thrawn into this, but he's not the same canon, but he's doing the same things. It gets confusing. Okay? Also, I am condensing a lot. I know you won't believe it. I am. I swear I am. It is the truth. I had to skim over entire storylines I wanted to talk about. I tried to focus on mostly relating to feminism, kind of. Which, speaking of, I have not read these books in forever. I did read a lot of books with Mara Jade in them. But I do remember 90s sexism in some of them, especially there was a whole storyline with Leia. We talked about it in Leia's episode in the 90s books where she was like, there's this species of creature that can emit pheromones and attract you. Oh, there was a whole storyline with that in Leia. And I don't know about that. So what I'm saying is I'm not sure it stands up. I don't know. But I will say, I thought Mara Jade was badass. She's kind of if you're more familiar with Marvel, she's kind of their version of Black Widow. Down to the red hair, she had green eyes, but the assassin spy type character, that was her. One of the reasons I've been wanting to talk about her is I have noticed a resurgence of her in fan fiction. And I talked about this in our zine episode. I think it's because people are publishing their zines from the 90s. Their fan fiction that they publish in those zines to fan fiction. But also some people, and I find this so incredibly fascinating, have just discovered Mara Jade because they've been watching the shows and sought out the books, and now they're like, who is this? And they're writing about her. But she's popping up a lot in a lot of fan fiction right now. Yeah. And also talk about religious trauma. Eesh. Poor Mara Jade. So in this one, we're going to talk mostly about her early history. In the next one, we'll talk about what happened to her later. And look, tune in. I don't care. This character is very fascinating and it's funny. So I'm telling you, if you're unfamiliar with this story, your mouth might drop at some parts. Anyway, it is not what you would expect, I think, if you've only seen the Disney version of Star Wars stuff lately. All right, so just to set the scene, we are talking about mainly the original trilogy of Star Wars movies and before Disney. Mara Jade was a human Force-sensitive woman that had quite the journey from Emperor's Hand, Smuggler, to Jedi Master, and member of the newly built Jedi Council. She was first introduced in 1991's Heir to the Empire by Timothy Zahn, and I loved that book. I still have it. It's right over there. I loved it. I've heard also, by the way, that Thrawn is sort of based on Timothy Zahn, who wrote, it's kind of him that he wrote. But anyway, Mara Jade has been called the most influential and important character never featured on screen in the Star Wars universe. She was in over 90 EU or Legends works. She consistently has made her way on list of favorite Star Wars characters, despite never being in a movie or show. And she has appeared in comics and games and was one of the first EU characters to get a toy. This surprised me because I thought people would hate her, actually. And I am going to talk about that in part 2. I just feel like a lot of Star Wars fandom isn't super welcoming to a strong woman character, or at least not where she would be on these lists as someone who's not even in the movies or any of the shows. But here we are. Her name was chosen because it means bitter in Hebrew. That's what I read. And Jade according to one of Zahn's dictionaries, meant discarded woman. So bitter, discarded woman.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, she had a lot of reason to be bitter because as a child, she was kidnapped and raised and trained to serve the emperor as his assassin. He kind of treated her in a very unhealthy and abusive way as his adopted daughter. He hid her training under the guise that she was an imperial palace dancer or one of his concubines. Oh boy. She was a powerful and deadly force operative. She was very, very, very competent. From a young age, she was conditioned to obey the emperor's orders, like conditioned, assassinating rebels, corrupt imperial operatives, pretty much anyone that somehow caught the emperor's attention in a bad way. She was trained by the Imperial Guard. So if you have only seen the original trilogy, the Imperial Guard are those like guys in red in Return of the Jedi that are hanging out around the Emperor. Yes. And she was very, very, very deadly. She was very, very professional by 14 and was named the Emperor's Hand, one of his prized assassins. Although he totally lied to her, and we're going to be talking about it. He lied and said she was the only one. There were multiple Emperor's Hands, but she believed she was the only one. And she earned this position by breaking into Tarkin's private quarters, though notably, she refrained from killing anyone in what she viewed as a training exercise. And there are a couple of instances of her sparing people she believed to be innocent, even going so far as to help them. Also notably, yeah, the Emperor lied about that, her being the only one. That's a big part of her story. He lied to all of them, all of the Emperor's Hands. He told them, you're the only one. Though I think some of them knew. I think some of them knew, but he lied about it. He did give her, quote, special treatment because he was so impressed with her work. Like he gave her private quarters. He gave her vacation. She was terrible at taking them, but he gave them to her. A violet-colored lightsaber. And her relationship with Darth Vader was contentious. Oh, it was contentious. The Emperor tasked her with spying on Vader and giving him regular reports. So this is when he was like, I know Vader's trying to kill me. I need you to keep an eye on this. But Mara Jade grew jealous of Vader, of his power, his place in the Empire, his place with the Emperor. And she could sense he was divided and that it had to do with a young Jedi named Luuke Skywalker. And she was completely baffled by this whole thing. And it got her hoping that Vader would in fact betray the Emperor so she could kill him and take his place. All of this was happening while she was working with Vader, like that whole espionage thing, layers upon layers. Oh my gosh. Like they work together, but they both know they're kind of betraying each other thing. A lot of classic disguises and gadgets, literal art heist, like stealing of paintings,
of course,
happened. Yes, going to the opera house, of course.
Do they wear like the sexy clothes so that they can be in disguise? Of course. Okay. Glad to know tropes like that goes into the Star Wars world.
Every galaxy. She had aliases. She has like 10 different names and all of them are funny. They're like the names where you're like, really? No one thought something like, oh, I'm going to steal your stuff was a fake name. Not quite on the nose as that, but pretty on the nose. There's lots of run-ins with the Millennium Falcon, lots of interrogations and escapes, including a rescue operation for the family of one of her potential victims, who she had decided was innocent and being manipulated by those holding his family hostage. That involved her working together with Luuke Skywalker. She didn't know it was him at the time. She didn't know. Not too long before the pivotal Battle of Endor, the Emperor summoned Mara Jade just as Vader was introducing a new hand, a new Emperor's hand. So while Mara Jade still believed she was the only one, there was an immediate distrust and hostility between the two that lasted a long time. After the Battle of Hoth, Mara Jade was made aware of the Emperor's worries and concerns about Luuke Skywalker, and she was assigned with infiltrating Jabba's palace, since intelligence was pointing to the fact he was working on a plan to save his friend Han Solo, who was in carbonite, hanging in that palace.
Well, of course.
Yes. Her disguise was a dancing girl named Arica. She is in the Star Wars radio drama, which I cannot recommend enough. I really can't. She's in it. Some people like to try to point out in Return of the Jedi, which is coming back to theaters, by the way, because it's the 40th anniversary, that she's in there. She's not. But people like to be like, that's her. No. She interrogated C-3PO about Luke, but didn't get much out of him. Surprise, surprise. Some of Jabba's security suspected her, but she turned the tables on them using the Force. When Luke was scheduled to be executed, she tried to sway Jabba to let her come watch. She wanted to see it. But Jabba refused, instead telling her that she should leave and never come back because he had sensed her trying to use a Jedi mind trick on him. And he was like, no. Mara Jade returns to a very unhappy Emperor, and skipping ahead, years later, Luke has a vision that if she had not been turned away, she would have captured him on Tatooine. So, as the Emperor died, Mara Jade got the last command of the Emperor. You will kill Luke Skywalker. It was like this creepy, brainwashy voice in her head that was like booming, commanding her. And she did have this like telepathic force link with the Emperor, so she could hear him no matter where she was, which is rare. Like, it's kind of hard to do. And the pain of it, the pain of this last command of him dying, knocked her unconscious. And because of all this, she hated Luke Skywalker. And her hatred did come from this telepathic command, but she didn't know that. And vowed to kill him. She was like, okay, this is your last command. Got it. The death of the Emperor, who had essentially controlled every aspect of her life for most of her life, sent her into a bit of a spiral. She was captured by those looking to fill the void left by the Emperor. She escaped. She went on the run. She took a bunch of odd jobs. Her force grew unpredictable. Like, she couldn't control it anymore. But still, she could still hear the Emperor's last command. She joined up with Smuggler Talon Card. I've always pronounced it Carade, but now I'm like, oh, it's probably definitely Card because his ship is called Wild Card. Well, anyway.
One way to figure it out.
Yeah, well, that's me with a lot of pronunciations. So she rises up the ranks to become the second in command in his organization. She becomes this hugely successful smuggler when Grand Admiral Thrawn started making moves to restore the Galactic Empire. He was like your next big villain after the Emperor. She was forced to work with, guess who? Luke Skywalker, revealing herself to be quite competent with a blaster. She's very good at hand-to-hand combat. She's a good mechanic. She's a good pilot. And Luke, in his Luke way, earned her respect. She kind of hated it. It was like, all right, he's good in a fight, I guess. Still, she did avoid him, seeing him only every now and then. She took over the Smugglers Alliance. Some of this is kind of out of order, but a lot is happening in these things, and I did condense it, I swear to God. Through spending time together and working together through things like the Corellian Crisis, she and Luke grew closer and closer, and eventually admitted they were in love with each other and wanted to spend their lives together, and they got
enemies
married.
To lovers. Enemies to lovers.
Huge trope. They got married, and we are going to dive into their wedding in the next one. Oh my gosh.
Ooh.
All right, Mara Jade took Luke's last name. She became Mara Skywalker, although sometimes it's Mara Jade Skywalker, but generally Mara Skywalker. And after a very severe, nearly fatal bout with a disease, they had a kid together named Ben. What? But we got to break all this down. I really just gave you a huge spoiler alert because I was kind of like, they need to know I'm talking so much about her run-ins with Luke. All right, so while working with Card, Mara Jade's force abilities did reestablish and led her to locating Luke Skywalker in a damaged X-Wing. Luke had a huge bounties on his head, so they captured him, hoping to start a bidding war. They secured him on this planet containing Ysalamiri. This is something else I've never heard aloud, but they're like these worm things. that nullify the Force.
Oh.
They're like furry creatures, and people would carry them on their backs to fight Jedi, like, because then they create this null force field. So they had some of those. Mara Jade just wanted to kill Luke, but Card wanted the money from the alive-only bounty. So this allowed Luke to escape. But in the ensuing chase, they both crashed, him and Mara Jade, and they had to work together to survive and avoid Thrawn. This didn't prevent her from telling Luke she fully intended to kill him. He was like, whatever. With the help of Han and Lando, Luke escaped. Realizing that Thrawn would never stop pursuing her, Mara Jade turned herself over to him to reclaim her role as Emperor's hand. Because, Thrawn was pretty much the new Emperor, in exchange for amnesty for Card and his crew. Thrawn tricked her, though, putting a tracker on her ship and capturing Card. Determined to free him, Mara Jade ventured out to find Dialsamari, however you pronounce it, to find Luke, who is now training under Joris C'baoth, who attacked her ship. She escaped, but then R2 attacked her ship. But she convinced him that C'baoth was working with the Empire and that Luke had a debt to Card. And Luke eventually agreed. The pair rescued Card. Later, Luke saved her, and she returned to save Leia and her family. It's a bunch of like saving each other in equal turns. She learned of Thrawn's cloning efforts and the Emperor's cloning facility. She was forced to work with Luke once again, and he became convinced that the Emperor was influencing and controlling her, even through death. And with his help, Mara realized that she was being used as a tool of vengeance against Darth Vader for betraying the Emperor. Luke swore he'd help her remove the command, this final command, even though she was like being impelled to kill him when he was near. He was like, nah, it's all right. We'll figure it out. They both had visions of confronting C'baoth, and Mara tried to get Luke to promise he'd kill her before letting the, quote, mad Jedi take over her mind. Instead, Luke promised that whatever happened, she wouldn't be alone. They confronted C'baoth, who forced Luke to fight a clone of himself, Luke, to use, wielding his father's lightsaber. Leia and Han tried to help, but they couldn't quite get the upper hand on C'baoth and Luke until Mara took Leia's lightsaber and joined the fray because she had, at this point, lost her own. Luke was able to injure the clone and provide her backup force reserves, allowing her to kill the clone, Luke, as the Emperor's last command boomed over and over again in her head, fulfilling it. She killed Luuke Skywalker. C'baoth was pissed and attacked the two, but Mara Jade fulfilled another force vision she had had of kneeling before him to dodge his attacks, allowing her to stab him with the lightsaber. Luke saved her from injury via the dark force exploding from C'baoth as he died, and he gave her his father's lightsaber to replace the one she'd lost. Wow. And this is like her entry. This is how we learn about her. So that's a crash course, but we do have a part 2. However, this is the end of part 1 for now, and the end of poor Luke, who I've seen fan fiction write him in like a positive manner of like, he just needed somebody to guide him.
Someone needs to save him, obviously.
Yeah, the clones don't always have to be bad. What's the point of the fan fiction I just read? Anyway, please, I hope you've enjoyed this part 1, but you've got to tune in for part 2 because we're going to talk about the wedding. Obviously. We've got to talk about the wedding. Yes. Well, thank you, Samantha, for listening.
Loved it.
Yes. And listeners, if you have thoughts about Mara Jade or any other suggestions for who we should talk about in these fictional women segments, you can email us. Our email is stuffmediamomstuff@iheartmedia.com. You can find us on Twitter at momstuffpodcast or on Instagram and TikTok at Stuff One Never Told You. You can also find us on YouTube. We also have a book you can pre-order at stuffyoushouldreadbooks.com. Thanks, as always, to our super producer, Christina, our executive producer, Maya, and our contributor, Joey.
Thank you.
And thanks to you for listening. Stuff I Never Told You is a production of iHeartRadio. For more podcasts from iHeartRadio, you can check out the iHeartRadio app, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your favorite shows.